No, it is March, actually, the first of our series as it relates for the month of March. And for sure, time is moving swiftly by as it relates to our here. And for sure, the various adversaries are increasing in terms of their approach, in terms of how it is that they try to outsmart the organizations and the good guys as it relates to the issue of security. And for this week, well, particularly for today, I mean, for some persons, it might be your morning, your afternoon, whatever state it is. I mean, sure, we are grateful that we can have this session whereby we can always share with each other and to strengthen our cybersecurity knowledge as we move forward as professionals within the industry. And as usual, we have um, Chris Carter, our executive risk advisor, who is always joining us to share his various insights into the articles that we have to discuss. So, Chris, welcome again to CyberJA.
Always a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. As you know, this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. So hopefully, we'll all learn something from it. But yeah, just a warning for those of you who are listening. It's gonna be a good one. I'm very excited. Hopefully, we'll get into some deep topics about about what we're going to talk about today, and walk away with some key takeaways.
Sure, exactly. And I look forward to it. And just before we actually get into our conversation, let me quickly just uh, paste the link to our discussion for those who want to, I mean, follow along in our conversation as we go along. And for sure, I mean, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to everyone to our conversation. So there we have the link in our chat. So you can always, I mean, feel free to ask your question to participate in our discussion as we see to gain some insights. But in particular, we're looking at a very interesting article um, that comes to us from the CSO online as it speaks to DNA Diagnostic Center find 400,000 for a 2021 data breach. Even though it's within 2021, there is a lot for us to learn and to put into perspective as it relates to risk. And we want to look at this from the perspective of why having an asset inventory is paramount to securing your business. And there are a number of questions, there are a number of avenues that we're going to be looking into as we go along. I mean, things such as the challenges to securing business assets or even locating these assets. And looking at the best approaches to dealing with these challenges as it relates to asset inventory and its importance. But before we actually dive into all those avenues, Chris, as it relates to this particular article, there's something in it, the article that resonates. Is the fact that negligence is not an excuse for letting consumer data get stolen. That's very important, right? In other words, there is no excuse for our negligence in whatever we do. But before we actually look into that aspect, can you, Chris, share with us, give us a background into this article itself in terms of the findings, the reporting, and what is actually happening before we seek to dissect this in terms of security and risk?
Yeah, absolutely. So, high level DNA Diagnostic Center basically work with people, or they go out to people, and they collect all kind of genetic. They do genetic tests on people, looking at their fertility, their health, and other types of health questions, health and wellness questions. In the process of doing that, they collected personal HIPAA data, uh, and that data set was stored on assets that were not properly protected by the organization. They acquired another company. The legacy asset was there with the information. The breach took place probably 20 years ago, I would say, 10 years ago. And they weren't aware of it. When they found out about it, they then kind of hid it. They didn't do a very good job in terms of, disclosing that there was a data breach. Hence the fine. I think it was by both Pennsylvania and Ohio, each state fining DNA Diagnostic Center $200,000 each, which is, a slap on the wrist, given the fact that HIPAA information was exposed. And as you know, and everyone on the call knows, that once your biometric data is breached and is in the hands of the wrong people, you don't have much recourse. You lose your phone, you lose your password, you could reset your password, you could replace your phone, but your biometric personal information, very difficult to replace because you only get one set of DNA. You only get one fingerprint. You can't change your iris, right? You could, but it would probably take a lot of work to do so. So there are a lot of things there that, in my opinion, this was a very small fine, a slap on the wrist, if you will, in terms of the consequence for being negligent.
Sure. As I actually look into this article, there are a number of avenues, there are a number of questions that one could ask as it relates to this breach. And one of the number one question is always, how did this actually happen? In light of all the various security measures, the security controls, the fact that this is a regulated industry, they have to be compliant. Looking at the scope of that compliance, looking at their overall infrastructure, how it is that this actually took place in light of the fact that this industry has to comply with HIPAA. And for sure, it outlines a number of standards, a number of requirements in terms of what it is that they need to have in place in terms of their security controls. So what actually led to this happening? Is it a situation of necessary policies, necessary controls, not having enough effective monitoring in place that actually led to this breach? What was the finding from this report?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, one of my heroes online, his name is Jarek Beeson, says hackers normally don't hack in, they log in to your network. And this was the case with DNA Diagnostic. Based on the settlement, I think a threat actor gained initial foothold through a VPN of DNA Diagnostic Center, and then migrated to a different VPN, right, lateral movement, that, again, no users should have. I'm sorry, I'm in a room where, 1 second here. Yeah, where no user should have access to that. No user should have access to that VPN. They logged in, remote access, and then from there, they again moved laterally, maintained persistence, and then wreak havoc, which is you follow the Lockheed Martin kill chain. They pretty much went, they did their reconnaissance, and then they logged in, lateral movement, and the rest is history. We're here today talking about the $400,000 fine that DNA Diagnostic Center has to pay.
Yeah, exactly. So, looking at the scenario, it says that you have actually explained, how it is that they actually got in as it relates to their VPN. So I have actually heard a number of, feedbacks as it relates to asset inventory. And the question behind all of this is, why having an asset inventory, paramount to securing a business? Or why is it, important to take this into consideration or to prioritize the assets within the organization. Because based on what I'm seeing here, it's almost a case whereby there were devices inside that environment, based on your article, that
Right.
no one actually knew existed. And the question was, how it is that you are operating such an environment, such an organization, and you have things lying around the organization that you're not aware of. I mean,
Right.
how can this, what are some of the things that could actually be led or to have led to this happening within the organization?
I think, again, not having a framework, this is not my opinion. I think it's the opinion of professionals, of seasoned people with doctorate and PhDs and years of experience in the industry. They'll tell you that having a framework is critical. And you look at any type of framework, whether it's NIST or one of the ISO standards, they all tell you that for example, CIS, the 18 controls, their first control is asset inventory. You look at NIST, you talk about the cybersecurity framework, identify, right, is the first function, right, looking at your assets, ISO 27001 standard, asset register. So I think having a framework or a standard through which you manage your you manage your cybersecurity program is critical. And again, overall, having an asset inventory is essential for any effective cybersecurity program. One, it helps you understand what you need to protect. Two, it prioritizes your security efforts. Three, it helps you comply with regulations. The other part is it also helps you to effectively respond to incidents. You have to manage your life cycles, and most importantly, every CISO wants a budget. It can help you optimize your cybersecurity budget. So those are just a few points in terms of having an asset inventory. Why it is essential and why not having one will lead to precarious consequences.
Yeah, sure. Having that framework in place is definitely good. But based on past experience, it's something that many organizations challenge. I mean, have it's a challenge for many organizations. Based on my experience, I've been in organizations working along. You go to various departments, offices. There are devices. Something stuck in a corner. There's a network cable connected to a device. No one knows the reason why it's there. That machine is running for months, years, connected to the network. It is not being monitored, it is not being patched, it is there serving no purpose. And at times, there is also a transition in employees. You have one CISA, there's a security expert, persons come, they leave, and then you have these various loopholes within an organization that opens up the attack surface. And at times, it's not a matter of being negligent, but not having that structure in terms of um, organizing and monitoring the various components that are required to make the organization work in terms of um, its network infrastructure.
Right.
Um, and very important is the fact that I'm also seeing there that someone is saying that knowing assets to control and reduce the companies that, oh, okay, so pretty much alluding to the same fact that we are seeing. Um, it cannot be a manual process when it comes on to managing inventory. And based on the fact that it has to be very structured. And based on experience, when you talk about knowing your attack surface, knowing your inventory, at times persons might think it's just a matter of walking around the departments, writing down serial numbers, saying, yes, we have 5 servers or XYZ. But it has to be somewhat of a automated. I mean, you have to have a program. And when I say program, not just an application running on the network, but it has to be properly, I mean, structured and managed despite the maybe lack of resources to actually control or to monitor the assets that exist within the organization. And there are a number of other challenges that actually leads to this situation taking place. But before we actually dive further into those, I mean, can you share, I mean, more insights into that aspect? I think that is a very big problem, which is that organizations can really um, design and develop that method, that mechanism to ensure that they know what exists within the environment. I mean,
No,
what is real versus what is rogue, what is, I mean, what is shadow IT, XYZ.
no, and I think a lot of companies, what I'm seeing now, what a lot of companies are doing is they're putting together just exactly what you're saying, and having a CMDB, right, a configuration management database, really is what you're kind of uh, hitting, right? You're kind of alluding to having that CMDB, knowing where all your CIs are, right? Your configuration items are, and knowing when they are onboarded, when they are offboarded, gives you it's kind of the first step in the right direction, right? So you look at companies like ServiceNow or Ivanti. I think even Archer is moving into the space in terms of helping you get that clarity or get that kind of view of your protect surface, right? So your attack surface is the entire globe, right? But when you talk about your protect surface, you're talking about your assets that are uh, that allows you to operate a business, allows you to generate revenues and help you function, right? So it could be printers, it could be laptops, it could be servers, it could be, depending on your network infrastructure. It could be cables, it could be routers, it could be switches, right? All those things make up your assets. Why? Because they are a part of your protect surface, and the more intelligence you have in terms of what the lay of the land looks like, the more effective your cybersecurity program will be, because you start looking at your XDR or your EDR or your MDR tools that allows you that tells you, okay, these are the assets that I have, these are the vulnerabilities that are sitting on that asset. This endpoint has this particular challenge. I can now, if something happens, I can quarantine that asset, right? Uh, and then from that type of information, you can gather intelligence and you can develop analytics to say, how do I further enrich my CMDB to ensure that this asset is highly critical asset versus this asset, less criticality. But at least if a bad actor come in through using that asset, you're able to quickly first you're able to protect it, and then respond in the event that an incident or an event occurs.
Yeah, that's a very valid point as well. Um, but as I analyze and I actually look into the realities of what you're saying, though, there are two situations that are happening as it relates to assets or inventory management. Two things that comes to mind. I'm just talking about based on this experience. You could be in an organization that starts from scratch, meaning you were there when everything was being built. So you
Right.
know where everything lies, how things are connected, how things work, configuration. And secondly, you could inherit an organization whereby the organization could be very complex. I mean, various departments, various routers, switches, printers, many departments. I mean, it could be a combination of on-premise, cloud, hybrid. That in itself creates a very dynamic, I mean, challenging situation in terms of managing your inventory, in terms of managing your attack surface. So it requires a lot of capabilities that a number of organizations really do not have in terms of the applications, putting those program in place. So I always say that persons, one of the best approach as it relates to your, I mean, asset inventory is treat it, I mean, in a case where it is possible, treat it in a case as if a least privileged situation whereby if you do not need it, then get rid of it. And that's one of the best ways I try to treat with based on past experience. Once there is something on my network, well, once it is visible or you know it exists, then you get rid of those things. And if there's a need and somebody says, hey, I am not able to use XYZ, then you begin to narrow down your entire asset in terms of what is critical to the business itself.
Right.
And that's the thing in terms of being able to know the assets that contribute to the business or the organization versus those that are just there for aesthetic. And that is where a lot of companies, organizations have problem. A lot of fancy things are attached. Yes,
Yeah.
this smart TV look good here, but the smart TV has a port, it has protocols, it has interfaces that are open. It might be there on the wall, I mean, as a form of entertainment to visitors to your organization, but it also has an attack surface. So all of these things have to be placed into perspective as it relates to the overall, I mean, management of assets within an organization.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah, go ahead.
therein lies the rub, right? Because one thing, we may have been talking, and if people are listening, someone may say, "Well, it seems like the inventory belongs in the cybersecurity, or the CISO is responsible for the asset inventory." Wrong, right? The CISO is not responsible for managing the asset inventory. The CISO influences what the asset inventory looks like. The business, or you have a separate asset management function, is responsible for that. The CISO can challenge, the CISO can influence, the CISO can collaborate, but it's not her responsibility at all, right? She it impacts her, right? And she may play a role. She may influence how that asset inventory is managed, how it's procured, it's how you take care of it. But at the end, like, she really doesn't have any. At the end of the day, the bottom line is it's not her responsibility. She has very little input, so she's at the mercy of the business and the infrastructure team, right? Like you said, if you have something there that's just window dressing, but it increases your attack surface, it's now her job as a chief information security officer to bring awareness to the business or the infrastructure team to say, hey, you have this asset, and you are taking the risk of keeping this asset afloat. You've done a risk analysis, and you're saying, yep, I really want to have this really pretty 90-inch plasma screen, so when people come in, they can see things, right? At the risk of an attacker coming in, right, through a side channel, um, and using that as a pivot point to enter into your environment. Hopefully, that's not the case. That's a bad example, because you should have your network should be segmented. You should have the proper controls on the asset, but just from a hypothetical point of view, um, if that were to happen, the CISO's job would be to convince, influence the decision around minimizing or mitigating the risk associated to that asset, right? Hopefully, it's already in your asset inventory, and from there, there's a risk register, and you start in terms of mitigating and better understanding.
Sure. I see someone asking a very important question. What mitigation technique do you suggest will address a situation when the third party security application is compromised, such as an IDS or IPS or something? And I've heard this question so often. So I guess this, yes, go ahead. Probably you want to before
No, go
I
ahead.
would have said that this goes back to third party risk management. It all goes back to managing the risk associated with third party. And this in itself is an entire program, an entire discussion in terms of the established best practices. There are some recommendations from NIST, CIS, all of those organizations that have various documentation that comprehensively, I mean, highlights all the measures that you have to take. And the fact is that it is more than just, I mean, signing agreements, but it all comes back to the liabilities. So even though you have all of these third-party vendors providing these services, you have to bear in mind that we have seen it, we have heard it. These companies are also prone to breaches, things happening within the that can actually open up various avenues for your organization to be attacked, to be breached. Therefore, in light of those things, then you have to take things a little bit further by ensuring that you put the necessary measures in place to say, hey, if this should really happen, if my third party should get breached, how it is that my company, my organization will be protected, or it is that we will remain operational regardless of what is happening to a third party. So it boils back down to your approach and risk management and being prepared for what eventualities can actually take place. So to me, that's one of the best way to treat with it, because there's no particular tool or application or team or stock that you can actually put in. It's about preparation. If this, if this should happen, what do I do? What measures do I have in place? Do I have backup? Do I have a system that is able to help us to continue our operation? Is our network segmented? Are those critical assets, properly hardened? Things like those, and the list goes on. That's one of the best way I could see it.
You know,
So
I second that. I think, having the controls in place. Talked about a framework at the beginning of the conversation. That's really critical, right? You should have controls in place where you have internal risk and you have external risk. Your external risk could be your suppliers, where you have supply chain risk, so your ISP, right? Or you may have a third party that you've outsourced a part of your business to because it makes sense to do that. There should be controls in place that allows you to govern uh, and do assessment on those third parties. And additionally, in addition to that, hopefully you would have done some threat modeling that allows you to come up with those scenarios. What happens if, right? And then perhaps even some tabletop exercises to prepare you, right? So disaster preparedness is a critical part of your cybersecurity program, which is an entirely different one. There are a lot of different avenues and controls, mitigating controls you can put in place that allows you to effectively prepare yourself in the event of a disaster. Right? Continuity is a part of it, right? Your BIA assessment, your BIA, you do your DRP. All of those should be a part of your of your calculus when you're putting together an effective world-class cybersecurity program. So it's a great question. As you can tell from the answers that you're getting, that it's a hot topic. It is a risk that you have to manage because in an interconnected world, distributed environment, where organizations are looking to save money, at the same time, they're inadvertently increasing their attack surface, right? Whether it's through a third party or through a supply chain or internal. Those are all things that are governance risk compliance programs that you have to keep and manage effectively.
sure. And for sure, we are down to our last 2 minutes before we do our wrap up for this segment. But just to bear in mind that as it relates to managing your asset inventory, just a few pointers just to think about, and especially for those persons who might not be, I mean, abreast with or in depth in terms of that knowledge as it relates to your inventory, your risk. There are no more things that you can do that based on what you have presented. And network segmentation for sure, in terms that also provides a number of a good layer of defense in terms of when assets are compromised, ensuring that you have necessary access control in place, you are doing your network monitoring, your threat intelligence, doing your regular vulnerability scans. And the list goes on. And for sure, consult the various recommended best practices documents, or some persons say good practices, that exist, and you should be on your way. The fact is, guys, no one, no company, no organization is immune or exempt from breaches. And it's not a case of ever blaming organization for breaches, because the best organizations who have the best resources are breached. And at times when they are breached, when you really find out the avenues that they are breached, it blows your mind to find out, to say, can it be really that actually happens? So if you're going to have total security, that means there's no functionality. So where is functionality, in there has to be compromise and managing of risk. So on that note, then guys, that's a wrap until next week when we meet again. So Chris, it was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure. See you.
All right, guys.